I stood in the empty ballroom at the Grandview Hotel, watching 100 confused guests trickle through the golden double doors. They clutched elegant invitations and carried wrapped gifts, their faces shifting from anticipation to bewilderment as they surveyed the barren space. No decorations adorned the cream-colored walls. No music filled the silence. No birthday cake graced the abandoned tables draped in plain white linens. My phone buzzed relentlessly against my palm as my family frantically tried to reach me. For 28 years, they had forgotten my birthday while expecting me to orchestrate elaborate celebrations for my younger sister Jessica. This year, I had planned something different. 2 hours away on a secluded beach, I finally celebrated myself. 3 weeks earlier, I woke up on my 28th birthday to the sound of my alarm clock and the familiar weight of disappointment settling in my chest. The morning sunlight streamed through my apartment windows as I padded to the kitchen, already knowing what awaited me. My phone screen remained blank. No birthday messages, no missed calls, nothing. I spent the morning in my small galley kitchen testing a new recipe for Jessica's upcoming 25th birthday cake. The vanilla batter filled my mixing bowl as I carefully measured each ingredient, determined to perfect the dessert that would anchor her celebration in 3 weeks. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was baking a practice cake for my sister on my own forgotten birthday. By noon, I had frosted the golden layers with cream cheese icing and carefully packed the cake in a pristine white box. I drove across town to our family home, a sprawling colonial where I had grown up feeling perpetually invisible. The driveway overflowed with cars and laughter spilled from the open front door. Inside, I found my family gathered around the mahogany dining table, surrounded by color swatches, venue brochures, and catering menus. My mother, Carol, looked up from a stack of invitation samples, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Perfect timing, honey," she said without acknowledging the cake box in my hands. "We need your help finalizing Jessica's party details." My sister Jessica sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, her auburn hair catching the afternoon light as she sorted through photographs of floral arrangements. At 24, she had perfected the art of gracious entitlement, accepting elaborate gestures as her natural birthright. "The venue coordinator needs final headcount numbers by Friday," Jessica announced, sliding a leather portfolio toward me. "Can you handle the RSVP tracking? You're so much better at organizing than I am." My father, David, emerged from his home office, checkbook in hand. "Here's the budget for the celebration," he said, tearing off a check made out to me for $15,000. "I trust you'll make sure every detail is perfect for our Jessica." I stared at the check, my throat tightening as the significance of the date registered nowhere on their faces. Not one family member had mentioned my birthday, not my mother who had given birth to me on this exact day 28 years ago, not my father who had carried me on his shoulders to birthday parties when I was small, not Jessica for whom I had planned countless celebrations. "I'll take care of everything," I whispered, slipping the check into my purse. The conversation flowed around me as they discussed guest lists and party favors, their voices blending into white noise, while I stood there feeling like a ghost in my own family. I excused myself quietly and retreated to my childhood bedroom, now converted into Carol's craft room, but still containing a few remnants of my adolescence. In the back of the closet behind boxes of Christmas decorations, I found my old diary with its faded purple cover. The pages fell open to entries I had written years earlier, and my heart sank as I read the pattern of neglect documented in my own handwriting. Age 8. Nobody remembered my birthday today. Mom was helping Jessica with her school project for the science fair. Age 12. It's my birthday, but Jessica has her piano recital tonight. Mom said we'll celebrate mine later, but we never did. Age 16. My sweet 16 was supposed to be special, but everyone's focused on Jessica's graduation party planning. I spent my birthday addressing invitations for her celebration. Age 21. Legal drinking age, and nobody noticed. Jessica got into college today, so the whole family went out to celebrate her acceptance letter. I stayed home and ordered pizza. The diary entries painted a devastating picture of decades spent in Jessica's shadow. I had become the family's invisible event coordinator, the reliable daughter who handled logistics, while Jessica basked in attention. Page after page revealed the same heartbreaking cycle of forgotten birthdays and overlooked milestones. Then I found something that made my breath catch. Tucked between the diary pages was a birthday card I had made for myself at age 10, written in my careful childhood handwriting. Dear future Mia, I promise you'll never let anyone make you feel invisible again. You deserve to be celebrated too. Love, 10-year-old Mia. I had broken that promise for 18 consecutive years. Sitting on the craft room floor surrounded by the debris of forgotten birthdays, I felt something shift deep inside me. The familiar ache of disappointment transformed into something sharper, more purposeful. This year would be different. This year, I would finally keep the promise I had made to myself as a lonely 10-year-old girl. I carefully returned the diary to its hiding place, but kept the birthday card. As I walked downstairs, I could hear my family still planning Jessica's extravaganza, their voices animated with excitement for a celebration that would cost more than most people's annual salaries. I paused in the doorway watching them plan and plot and dream about making Jessica's day perfect. For just a moment, I imagined what it would feel like to have that kind of attention focused on me. Then I smiled and headed toward my car, already formulating a plan that would change everything. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into planning Jessica's party with meticulous precision while simultaneously crafting my own escape. Each phone call to vendors served a dual purpose, each decision bringing me closer to a moment of reckoning that would shatter my family's comfortable assumptions about my endless availability. I started with the venue spending an entire afternoon at the prestigious Grandview Ballroom with their events coordinator, a polished woman named Sandra, who specialized in high-end celebrations. The ballroom was everything Jessica had dreamed of: soaring ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, and enough space to accommodate 200 guests in elegant comfort. "Your sister has exquisite taste," Sandra commented as I signed the contracts. "This will be an unforgettable celebration." I smiled tightly, knowing just how unforgettable it would truly become. Next, I contacted Premier Catering, arranging for their 5-star service to provide a 7-course dinner featuring Jessica's favorite foods. The menu included herb-crusted salmon truffle risotto and chocolate souffle with gold leaf garnish. I scheduled multiple tastings, created detailed dietary restriction lists, and coordinated serving times down to the minute. The floral arrangements required 3 consultations with Bella Rosa Designs, the most exclusive florist in the city. Jessica wanted cascading white orchids with touches of blush pink centerpieces that would cost more than my monthly rent. I approved elaborate designs featuring imported flowers and custom crystal vases. For entertainment, I booked the City Jazz Ensemble, a 7-piece band known for playing at gubernatorial galas and corporate celebrations. Their contract included 4 hours of live music, special lighting equipment, and a sound system that could fill the ballroom with perfect acoustics. Photography would be handled by Marcus Chen, whose artistic portraits graced the society pages of our local magazine. I arranged for him to capture every moment of the celebration, from pre-party preparations to the final dance. Each vendor conversation followed the same pattern. I provided detailed specifications, approved premium upgrades, and assured everyone that cost was no object. Then I made sure to clarify one crucial detail: payment would be handled through separate arrangements. While my days were consumed with Jessica's party logistics, my evenings belonged to research of a different kind. I spent hours browsing travel websites, reading reviews of coastal bed and breakfasts, searching for the perfect refuge where I could disappear during Jessica's celebration. Seaside Haven Bed and Breakfast appeared on my screen like a gift from the universe. Located 3 hours north along the rugged coastline, it offered private suites with ocean views, gourmet dining, and complete isolation from the demands of family obligations. The website featured photographs of cozy rooms, with fireplaces, private balconies overlooking crashing waves, and spa services designed for ultimate relaxation. I called the owner, a warm-voiced woman named Helen, who immediately understood my need for solitude and renewal. "We specialize in guests who need to reconnect with themselves," she explained. "You'll have complete privacy and all the pampering you deserve." I booked the ocean view suite for the weekend of Jessica's party, including spa treatments, private dining, and access to the secluded beach. For the first time in months, I felt excitement building as I planned something entirely for myself. Meanwhile, my family's involvement in party planning remained superficial. They attended vendor meetings when convenient, offered opinions on minor details, and assumed I would handle all the complex coordination. Carol focused on her book club obligations. David buried himself in work projects. Jessica treated the party planning like a royal court receiving tribute, making increasingly elaborate demands without considering the effort required to fulfill them. "I've decided I want an ice sculpture," Jessica announced during one family dinner. "Something elegant, maybe a swan or a peacock." I nodded and made a note, mentally calculating the additional coordination required for ice delivery and display. "Also, the linens should be silk, not cotton," she continued. "And I want vintage champagne, not that contemporary stuff you originally suggested." Each new demand required phone calls, contract modifications, and careful scheduling. I managed every detail while Jessica enjoyed the luxury of pure anticipation without responsibility. The most challenging aspect was creating fake vendor confirmations to show my family. I spent evenings crafting professional-looking emails, confirming delivery times and setup schedules that would never happen. My laptop became filled with fictional correspondence designed to maintain the illusion that everything was perfectly arranged. 2 weeks before the party, I made my most important reservation. I called the Grandview Ballroom and paid only for the basic room rental, nothing more. When Sandra asked about catering coordination, I explained that other vendors would handle setup separately. When she inquired about decorating access, I provided vague assurances about timing. "Are you certain you don't want our comprehensive planning package?" Sandra asked. "Coordination between multiple vendors can become complicated." "I'm confident everything will work out perfectly," I replied, knowing that my definition of perfect had shifted dramatically. My escape plan took shape with mathematical precision. I would leave early on the morning of Jessica's party, driving north to Seaside Haven, while my family prepared for their grand entrance. By the time guests began arriving at 4 o'clock, I would be checking into my ocean view suite, finally celebrating myself after 28 years of being overlooked. The anticipation felt intoxicating. Every fake email I sent, every vendor call I made, every detail I pretended to coordinate brought me closer to a moment of liberation that had been 28 years in the making. But then Jessica delivered a blow that nearly shattered my carefully constructed resolve. "I hope you don't mind," she said casually during one of our final planning meetings, "but I invited Ryan as my +1. You know your ex-boyfriend? I figured you're totally over him by now, right?" The room seemed to tilt as her words registered. Ryan, who had dumped me on my 26th birthday, claiming he needed space to grow? Ryan, who had started dating a college student 3 days later? Ryan, who would now witness my family's humiliation from a front row seat? Of course, I managed to say, my voice remarkably steady. That's fine. But inside, something crystallized with diamond-hard clarity. Jessica's casual cruelty, her thoughtless assumption that my feelings didn't matter, her complete inability to consider how her choices might affect me. It all represented everything that was wrong with my family's treatment of me. That night, I finalized my reservations at Seaside Haven with renewed determination. Jessica wanted a memorable party. She would get one, just not in the way she expected. 1 week before the party, my family gathered for what they called the final coordination meeting. I arrived at the family home carrying a leather portfolio filled with carefully crafted lies, my stomach churning with anticipation for what was about to unfold. Carol had transformed the dining room into a command center with seating charts spread across the mahogany surface and vendor contracts organized in color-coded folders. David sat in his usual spot at the head of the table, reviewing financial documents with the satisfied expression of someone who believed money could solve any problem. Jessica perched in the chair beside him, radiating excitement as she examined fabric samples for last-minute decor adjustments. "Wonderful you're here," Carol announced as I settled into my designated seat. "We have quite a few additional items to discuss." She slid a handwritten list across the table, and my heart sank as I read the new expectations they had compiled without consulting me. Guest parking coordination at 3 separate locations. Coat check management for 200 winter garments. Thank you card addressing for all attendees complete with personalized messages. Set up supervision starting at 6 in the morning. Cleanup crew management extending until midnight. We know it's a lot. David said, his tone suggesting he believed this acknowledgement absolved him of any guilt. But you're so naturally gifted at handling complex logistics. Jessica and your mother would be lost trying to manage all these moving pieces. Jessica nodded enthusiastically, completely oblivious to the weight she was adding to my shoulders. You're like a professional event planner, except better, because you actually care about making everything perfect for family. The casual way she claimed ownership of my labor as if my skills existed solely for her benefit made my chest tighten with suppressed rage. Actually, Jessica continued, pulling out her phone to show me photographs, I've changed my mind about the theme. Vintage feels too stuffy. I want tropical now, palm fronds, bright colors, maybe some steel drum music instead of jazz. I stared at the images she had curated, vibrant flowers, bamboo decorations, and a completely different aesthetic that would require canceling and rebooking every vendor I had spent weeks coordinating. The party's in 7 days, I said slowly. Most vendors will charge cancellation fees for changes this late. Oh, money isn't an issue, David waved dismissively. Whatever it costs to make Jessica happy is worth it. I made careful notes about the theme change, knowing I would never make a single phone call to implement it. Instead, I watched my family discuss modifications to a celebration that would never happen, their confidence in my unlimited availability, both heartbreaking and infuriating. The meeting was interrupted by the arrival of my grandmother Betty, a tiny woman with steel gray hair who commanded respect through pure force of personality. At 83, she moved slowly but spoke with the clarity of someone who had observed 8 decades of family dynamics. "How are the party preparations progressing?" she asked, settling into the chair beside me with the careful movements of someone managing arthritis. Carol launched into an enthusiastic description of Jessica's celebration, detailing every luxury and extravagance they had planned. Betty listened politely, nodding at appropriate intervals, but her sharp blue eyes kept drifting to me. "And what about Mia's recent birthday?" Betty asked quietly when Carol finished her recitation. "How did the family celebrate that milestone?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Carol's expression shifted to confusion, then embarrassment as she realized the implication. David cleared his throat uncomfortably. Jessica looked genuinely puzzled, as if the concept of celebrating my birthday was foreign to her understanding of family traditions. "We were so focused on party planning," Carol said weakly. "We'll definitely make it up to her after Jessica's celebration." Betty's gaze sharpened, but she said nothing more about my forgotten birthday. Instead, she asked detailed questions about party logistics, guest accommodations, and timeline coordination. Her questions felt different from the others, less demanding, more observational. During the family discussion, my phone rang with a call from my coworker Emma. I stepped into the kitchen to answer, grateful for any escape from the planning session. "Mia, I have amazing news." Emma's voice bubbled with excitement. "I got the promotion to senior event coordinator. Mr. Patterson called me into his office this afternoon and offered me the position you applied for. I know you're disappointed, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. The promotion I had worked toward for 2 years, the career advancement that would have validated my professional skills and increased my salary by 30%, had gone to someone with half my experience, but twice my confidence and self-promotion." "Congratulations," I managed to say, my voice hollow with genuine disappointment. "You'll do great in that role." When I returned to the dining room, my family barely acknowledged my brief absence. They had moved on to discussing after-party logistics, assuming I would coordinate transportation cleanup crews and vendor payment schedules without question. "You're so quiet tonight," Carol observed, finally noticing my subdued mood. "Is everything all right with the party planning?" "Everything's perfect," I replied truthfully. My plan was indeed perfect, just not in the way she imagined. As the meeting concluded, I gathered my fake vendor confirmations and headed toward the front door. In the hallway, I paused to listen as my family continued their conversation without me. "We're so lucky Jessica has such a dedicated sister," Carol was saying to Betty. "Some daughters are just naturally giving. Mia never complains about handling these details." "Some daughters don't have a choice," Betty replied quietly, her words carrying a weight that made my chest ache. David laughed, apparently missing Betty's pointed observation. "Mia's always been our problem solver. Remember when she organized that surprise party for Carol's 50th? She was barely 21, but handled every detail like a professional." "What did the family do for Mia's 21st birthday?" Betty asked. The silence that followed answered her question more clearly than words ever could. I left the house that night carrying the weight of 28 years of casual neglect. In my car, I reviewed the timeline for my escape one final time. 7 more days of pretending everything was normal. 7 more days of coordinating a celebration that would showcase exactly how invisible I had become. But first I had one more devastating discovery to make. The next morning I stopped by Jessica's apartment to deliver fabric samples Carol wanted her to review. Jessica wasn't home, but her roommate let me in to leave the materials on her kitchen counter. As I arranged the samples, I noticed gift bags lined up on her dining table, early birthday presents from family members. Curiosity overcame my better judgment, and I peeked inside the bags. From Carol, a custom jewelry set featuring Jessica's birthstone in an intricate gold setting. From David, car keys attached to a BMW keychain. From various aunts and uncles' designer handbags, expensive perfumes, and gift certificates to exclusive boutiques. In the largest bag, I found the necklace that made my breath catch in my throat. A delicate silver chain holding a pendant shaped like a crescent moon, embedded with tiny diamonds that caught the morning light. 6 months earlier, I had admired this exact piece in a jewelry store window, mentioning to my parents how beautiful it was. Now Jessica would receive it as one of many birthday gifts, while I had received nothing at all 3 weeks ago. The car keys belonged to a brand new BMW convertible cherry red with cream leather interior. The price tag tucked discreetly in the glove compartment showed a figure that exceeded my annual salary. I stood in Jessica's apartment surrounded by evidence of my family's priorities, finally understanding the true depth of my invisibility. I wasn't just overlooked on my birthday. I was systematically excluded from the kind of generous, thoughtful gift-giving that my family considered normal for Jessica. That afternoon, I called Seaside Haven and upgraded my reservation to include their premium spa package. If my family could spend a small fortune celebrating Jessica's existence, I could invest in acknowledging my own worth. 7 days later, I would finally keep the promise I had made to my 10-year-old self. The only question was whether my family would learn to see me clearly once I disappeared from their comfortable assumptions about my eternal availability. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that makes promises feel possible. I woke before dawn in my studio apartment, my packed bags waiting by the front door like loyal soldiers ready for deployment. For the first time in weeks, my chest felt light instead of compressed with the weight of family obligations. I had spent Friday evening crafting a letter that would serve as both explanation and declaration of independence. The words had poured out of me like water through a broken dam, 28 years of suppressed feelings finally finding expression on cream-colored stationery. Dear family, it began. By the time you read this, you'll be standing in the Grandview Ballroom wondering where I am and why Jessica's party has become a disaster. The answer is simple. I'm finally celebrating myself the way you've celebrated Jessica for 25 years. Today is not about her. Today is about me learning to value myself enough to walk away from people who treat me like hired help instead of family. I hope you enjoy explaining to 100 guests why there's no food, no music, and no decorations. I hope you feel a fraction of the abandonment I've experienced every birthday for the past 2 decades. I'm at Seaside Haven Bed and Breakfast, discovering what it feels like to be truly cared for. I'll return when I'm ready to discuss how our family relationships need to change. Love, Mia. I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it on my kitchen counter, where my family would find it when they inevitably came looking for me. The drive north to Seaside Haven took me through small coastal towns I had never bothered to explore, past apple orchards heavy with autumn fruit and antique shops advertising handcrafted treasures. My car radio played soft jazz as I rolled the windows down, letting October air wash away the residue of family expectations. Seaside Haven appeared around a curve like something from a travel magazine. The Victorian mansion perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, its wraparound porch adorned with hanging baskets of late-blooming flowers. Climbing roses covered the white picket fence, and a wooden sign painted in sea glass blue welcomed guests to "Your home away from the world." Helen emerged from the front door as I pulled into the gravel driveway, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair twisted into a loose bun and eyes the color of sea glass. She wore a flowing skirt and cardigan that suggested artistic sensibility rather than corporate efficiency. "You must be Mia," she said warmly, approaching my car with the unhurried pace of someone who understood the value of presence. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." She helped me carry my bags to the Ocean View Suite, a room that exceeded every expectation I had harbored. French doors opened onto a private balcony, where 2 Adirondack chairs faced the endless expanse of sea and sky. Inside, a king-sized bed draped in white linens occupied the center of the room, flanked by windows that framed the coastline like living paintings. The bathroom has a soaking tub positioned to overlook the water," Helen explained, gesturing toward an ensuite that featured marble surfaces and heated floors. "Room service is available whenever you're ready, and the spa treatments you booked will begin at 2 o'clock. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax, as tension I hadn't realized I was carrying began to dissolve. Meanwhile, 3 hours south chaos was beginning to unfold at the Grandview Ballroom. The first guests arrived promptly at 4 o'clock, dressed in cocktail attire and carrying elegantly wrapped gifts. They approached the ballroom entrance expecting to find a check-in table staffed by smiling coordinators. Instead, they discovered Sandra, the events manager, looking increasingly frantic as she consulted her clipboard and tried to contact missing vendors. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be some confusion about today's setup," Sandra explained to the early arrivals. "The room rental is confirmed, but none of the contracted services have arrived for coordination." Robert and Margaret Chen, longtime family friends, exchanged puzzled glances as they surveyed the empty ballroom. Round tables covered in plain white linens dotted the space, but no centerpieces, place cards, or decorative elements suggested a celebration was imminent. "Perhaps we're early," Margaret suggested hopefully, though her watch clearly showed 4:15. By 4:30, 50 guests had arrived to find the same barren scene. The ballroom's crystal chandeliers illuminated nothing but confusion as well-dressed attendees clustered near the entrance, uncertain whether to enter or wait for some signal that the party was ready to begin. Jessica made her grand entrance at 4:45, expecting to find a reception line of admirers ready to celebrate her quarter-century milestone. Instead, she discovered a crowd of bewildered guests standing in an empty room that looked more like a corporate meeting space than a birthday celebration. She was stunning in her custom dress, a flowing creation of blush pink silk that had cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. Her auburn hair had been professionally styled into an elegant updo adorned with tiny pearl pins, and her makeup was flawless after 3 hours in a high-end salon chair. But her beauty couldn't disguise the shock and confusion that spread across her face as she realized her perfect party had become a disaster of epic proportions. "Where's the band?" she whispered to Carol, who had arrived moments behind her in a navy cocktail dress and pearls that suddenly seemed inappropriately formal for the stark reality of their situation. "Where's Mia?" Carol replied, her voice tight with growing panic as she scanned the room for any sign of her reliable daughter. David pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with the kind of anger that comes from public embarrassment. As a prominent local businessman, he was accustomed to events proceeding with clockwork precision. The sight of community leaders and potential clients witnessing his family's organizational failure made his jaw clench with barely controlled rage. "Someone needs to find Mia immediately," he ordered, pulling out his phone to dial my number. The call went straight to voicemail, my recorded voice cheerfully explaining that I was unavailable and would return calls when convenient. By 5 o'clock, the ballroom resembled a disaster zone of social awkwardness. Elderly relatives sat in folding chairs, discussing the unprecedented nature of the situation. Jessica's college friends clustered near the windows, taking photos of the empty room that would undoubtedly appear on social media within minutes. Business associates made polite excuses and began departing, unwilling to associate their reputations with such obvious dysfunction. Ryan, my ex-boyfriend, stood near the entrance looking like he regretted accepting Jessica's invitation. His discomfort was visible as he watched the family meltdown unfold clearly, wishing he could disappear into the crowd and escape the second-hand embarrassment of witnessing such intimate family chaos. "This is unprecedented in 30 years of event management," Sandra confided to Carol, her professional composure cracking under the pressure of explaining the unexplainable to increasingly agitated guests. Meanwhile, I was settling into my balcony chair with a cup of artisanal tea, watching waves crash against the rocks below, while seabirds wheeled overhead in perfect freedom. My phone tucked safely in my suitcase buzzed with increasing urgency as my family discovered the consequences of taking me for granted. At Seaside Haven, Helen appeared on my balcony carrying a plate of homemade scones and local honey. "First solo vacation?" she asked, settling into the chair beside me with the easy familiarity of someone who understood the healing power of coastal solitude. "First time putting myself first," I admitted, surprised by how natural it felt to speak truthfully to this virtual stranger. "Those are often the same thing," Helen replied with a knowing smile. "I've been running this place for 15 years, and I've learned to recognize guests who are reclaiming their lives rather than just taking a break from them." As afternoon sunshine warmed my face and salt air filled my lungs, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with my choices. 3 hours away, my family was learning what it meant to function without my invisible labor. But here, surrounded by natural beauty and genuine hospitality, I was finally discovering what it felt like to matter. The disaster unfolding at the Grandview Ballroom was just the beginning of a reckoning that would reshape my family's understanding of who I was and what I deserved. But for now, I was content to watch the ocean and breathe freely for the first time in 28 years. Back at the Grandview Ballroom, the situation deteriorated from awkward to catastrophic as more guests arrived expecting a celebration and found instead a masterclass in family dysfunction. By 5:30, nearly 100 people filled the empty space, their conversations creating an undercurrent of confusion and speculation that made the cavernous room feel smaller and more suffocating. Carol stood near the entrance, her carefully applied makeup beginning to streak as stress sweat mixed with tears of humiliation. She had spent 40 minutes calling every vendor on the contact list I had provided, only to discover that none of them had confirmed setup times. Premier Catering claimed they had no record of final menu approval. Bella Rosa Designs insisted their contract was incomplete without deposit confirmation. The City Jazz Ensemble had been booked for a corporate event in another city all along. "How is this possible?" Carol demanded of Sandra, who was frantically calling her own emergency vendor contacts in a desperate attempt to salvage the situation. My daughter coordinated everything perfectly. "She's been planning this for weeks." Sandra's professional demeanor began cracking under the pressure of managing an unprecedented crisis. "Mrs. Patterson, the room rental was paid in full, but none of the additional services were properly contracted. There's no catering order, no entertainment booking, no floral delivery scheduled." David paced near the bar area, his phone pressed to his ear as he tried calling every restaurant in the city that might deliver food for 100 people on 2 hours' notice. The responses were universally negative. Saturday evening was prime time for established catering companies, and most reputable restaurants couldn't accommodate emergency orders of such magnitude. Jessica sat alone at one of the empty tables, still beautiful in her custom dress, but increasingly resembling a bride abandoned at the altar. Her 25th birthday, the celebration she had planned to document on social media as proof of her family's love and affluence, had become a public spectacle of neglect and poor planning. The guest list read like a directory of local prominence. Mrs. Henderson from the Historical Society sat beside Dr. Martinez, who served on the hospital board with David. The mayor's wife chatted quietly with several city council members, their conversations undoubtedly centering on the unprecedented nature of the evening's events. These were people accustomed to well-orchestrated gatherings, community leaders who would remember this disaster for years to come. Worse still, Channel 7's society reporter had arrived to cover what was supposed to be an elegant celebration worthy of their weekend lifestyle segment. Cynthia Walsh, a sharp-eyed journalist known for her ability to transform local events into compelling television, stood near the windows with her camera crew documenting not a triumph of party planning, but a cautionary tale about family dynamics and failed expectations. "This is highly unusual," Cynthia murmured to her cameraman as she surveyed the empty tables and confused guests. "I've covered hundreds of celebrations, but I've never seen anything quite like this." Ryan, my ex-boyfriend, lingered near the exit, clearly calculating how quickly he could escape without appearing rude to Jessica, who had invited him as her guest. His discomfort was palpable as he watched my family's humiliation unfold, undoubtedly grateful he had ended our relationship before becoming permanently associated with such spectacular dysfunction. The social media consequences began immediately. Jessica's college friends, initially confused by the empty ballroom, started posting photos and videos that would circulate through their networks within hours. Images of vacant tables, bewildered guests, and a beautiful young woman sitting alone in formal wear would generate hundreds of comments and speculation about what had gone so dramatically wrong. "Where's the birthday girl's sister?" someone asked loudly enough for the question to carry across the room. "Isn't she supposed to be coordinating everything?" The question triggered a cascade of whispered conversations as guests shared their knowledge of family dynamics. Everyone knew I was the daughter who handled logistics, the reliable sister who made celebrations possible. My absence was becoming the most discussed aspect of an evening that was supposed to showcase Jessica's transition into adulthood. At 6 o'clock, desperation drove the family to gather in the ballroom's private consultation room for an emergency strategy session. Betty, my grandmother, had arrived shortly after 5, taking one look at the chaos and immediately understanding what had occurred. "Where is Mia?" Betty asked quietly, her steel blue eyes moving between Carol, David, and Jessica with laser precision. "We can't reach her," Carol admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's not answering calls or texts. This doesn't make sense. She spent weeks planning every detail." "When did you last celebrate Mia's birthday?" Betty asked, her question cutting through their confusion like a scalpel through infected tissue. The silence that followed was more revealing than any explanation they could have offered. 3 weeks ago," Betty continued relentlessly. "Mia turned 28 3 weeks ago. Did any of you acknowledge that milestone? Did you send cards, give gifts, take her to dinner, or even wish her happy birthday?" Carol's face crumpled as the realization hit her. "We were so focused on Jessica's party planning. We meant to celebrate Mia after everything was finished. After 28 years, she stopped believing in after," Betty said, with the clarity of someone who had observed decades of family patterns. "What you're experiencing tonight is the natural consequence of treating one daughter like hired help while treating the other like royalty." David's phone buzzed with a text message from his business partner who was among the stranded guests. "Dave, what's happening at your daughter's party? Clients are asking if everything's okay with your family's financial situation." The public humiliation was spreading beyond personal embarrassment into professional consequences. David's reputation as a successful businessman depended partly on his ability to manage complex situations effectively. Tonight's disaster suggested either incompetence or family problems that could affect client confidence in his leadership abilities. At 7 o'clock, they made the decision to address the guests directly, rather than continue pretending a celebration might still materialize. David stepped to the front of the ballroom, cleared his throat, and attempted to explain the inexplicable. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to unexpected family circumstances, we need to postpone this evening's celebration. We apologize for any inconvenience and appreciate your understanding during this difficult time. The announcement triggered an exodus of confused and frustrated guests. Gift bags were abandoned on tables as attendees retrieved their coats and made hasty departures, their conversations undoubtedly focusing on speculation about what family circumstances could cause such complete organizational failure. By 8 o'clock, the Grandview ballroom was empty except for my family members and Sandra, who was calculating penalty fees for unused space and attempting to schedule makeup dates for disappointed vendors. Jessica sat alone in the middle of the deserted room, her elaborate dress spread around her like the petals of a dying flower. For the first time in her 25 years, she was experiencing what it felt like to be forgotten, overlooked, and disappointed by people she trusted to celebrate her existence. "Where could Mia be?" she whispered finally, beginning to understand that her sister's absence was not accidental oversight, but deliberate choice. Meanwhile, at Seaside Haven, I was enjoying a leisurely dinner on my private balcony, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson, while Helen served me fresh salmon with herbs from her garden. My phone remained tucked away in my suitcase, its urgent buzzing no longer my concern. "Sometimes the most loving thing we can do," Helen said as she refilled my wine glass, "is force people to function without us long enough to realize what we contribute to their lives." I raised my glass to toast the most peaceful evening I had experienced in years, finally free from the weight of managing other people's happiness at the expense of my own. Sunday morning arrived at Seaside Haven with the kind of soft light that makes forgiveness seem possible. I woke naturally without an alarm, my body finally released from the chronic tension of managing family expectations. Through the French doors of my suite, I could see waves rolling steadily toward shore, their rhythm as reliable and soothing as a heartbeat. Helen had arranged for breakfast to be served on my private balcony, fresh fruit from local orchards, eggs from her own chickens, and coffee that tasted like luxury rather than necessity. As I settled into my chair with the morning newspaper, I heard the distant sound of car engines struggling up the winding coastal road that led to the bed and breakfast. 3 vehicles appeared in the gravel driveway below Carol's silver sedan, David's black SUV, and Betty's ancient blue Buick that she refused to replace, despite its tendency to overheat on long drives. My family had found me drawn by the combination of desperation and the tracking app on my phone that I had forgotten to disable. I watched from my balcony as they emerged from their cars looking like refugees from their own comfortable lives. Carol wore sweatpants and a wrinkled sweater, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. David's business casual had been replaced by jeans and a flannel shirt that made him look older and more vulnerable. Jessica appeared in leggings and an oversized hoodie, her face pale and makeup free in a way that stripped away her usual confident polish. Only Betty maintained her dignity, stepping carefully from her car in a navy dress and sensible shoes, moving with the deliberate precision of someone who had lived long enough to understand the weight of important conversations. They stood in the driveway for several minutes, clearly uncertain about how to approach a situation none of them had ever imagined. I had spent my entire life being available to them, solving problems and managing logistics without being asked. Now they had to figure out how to navigate an unfamiliar dynamic where I held the power and they needed something from me. Helen emerged from the main house, greeting my family with the same warmth she had shown me while maintaining protective boundaries around my space and privacy. "Mia is enjoying breakfast," she explained to them in her calm, measured voice. "I'll ask if she's ready to receive visitors." She climbed the exterior staircase to my suite and knocked gently on the French doors. "Your family is here," she said simply. "Would you like me to invite them up, or would you prefer to meet them somewhere else?" I looked down at my relatives standing awkwardly in the driveway, their familiar faces etched with an anxiety I had never seen before. For the first time in my life, they needed me more than I needed them. "Ask them to wait on the main porch," I said finally. "I'll join them in a few minutes." I took my time finishing breakfast, savoring the luxury of eating without rushing to accommodate someone else's schedule. When I finally descended to the wraparound porch, my family was seated in white wicker chairs, arranged in a semicircle looking like defendants awaiting judgment. Carol stood when she saw me, tears streaming down her face in a way that seemed both genuine and theatrical. "Honey, we've been so worried about you. When we couldn't reach you last night, we didn't know what to think." "You were worried about me?" I asked, quietly settling into the chair farthest from the group. "Or were you worried about explaining to 100 guests why Jessica's party was a disaster?" The question hung in the salt air like an accusation that couldn't be deflected or ignored. David cleared his throat, his business training kicking in as he attempted to manage the conversation like a difficult client meeting. "Mia, we understand you're upset about something, but disappearing without warning and sabotaging your sister's birthday celebration isn't the mature way to handle family disagreements." "Sabotaging," I repeated, my voice sharp with controlled anger. "I planned that party exactly the way you asked me to. I booked the venue, contacted vendors, managed logistics, and handled every detail while being ignored, overlooked, and treated like hired help instead of family. The only thing I sabotaged was your assumption that I would continue accepting invisible status while you lavished attention and money on Jessica." Jessica pulled her hoodie tighter around herself, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. "I didn't realize you felt ignored," she said softly. "I thought you liked planning parties and organizing things." "I liked feeling needed," I corrected. "I liked believing that my contributions mattered and that someday you might appreciate the effort I put into making your life beautiful. But appreciation requires recognition, and recognition requires actually seeing the person who's serving you." Betty leaned forward in her chair, her voice cutting through the family's defensive responses. "When was Mia's last birthday?" She asked again the same question that had exposed their neglect the night before. The silence stretched uncomfortably as my parents and sister were forced to confront their collective amnesia about my existence. 3 weeks ago," Carol whispered finally. "October 15th. She turned 28 and we completely forgot because we were focused on party planning for Jessica. Not just this year." I said, my voice gaining strength as I finally spoke truths I had buried for decades. "You've forgotten my birthday 17 times in the past 20 years. You've missed my graduation, my promotion interviews, my breakups, and my achievements because none of them coincided with Jessica's important events. I've spent my entire adult life being available for your celebrations while being invisible during my own milestones." The weight of accumulated neglect settled over the porch like fog rolling in from the ocean. For the first time, my family was forced to see their behavior from my perspective, to understand the cumulative damage of treating one daughter as essential while treating the other as expendable. "We never meant to make you feel unimportant." David said, his business confidence cracking to reveal something approaching genuine remorse. "We've always appreciated everything you do for the family." "Appreciation without acknowledgement is just exploitation with better intentions," I replied, surprised by the clarity of my own voice. "You've appreciated my labor while ignoring my humanity." Carol wiped her eyes with a tissue that was already saturated with tears. "How do we fix this? How do we make up for years of taking you for granted?" "You start by admitting that taking me for granted was a choice, not an oversight," I said firmly. "You chose to pour attention and resources into Jessica while assuming I would remain grateful for scraps of recognition. You chose to celebrate her achievements while treating mine as background noise. You chose to remember her needs while forgetting my existence. Jessica looked up from her huddled position, her eyes red with tears that seemed genuine rather than performative. I never asked you to sacrifice your happiness for mine, she said quietly. I didn't know you were suffering. You didn't ask because you didn't need to, I replied, my voice gentle but unwavering. Everyone else was already ensuring that your comfort came before my consideration. You learned to accept elaborate celebrations as your natural birthright, while I learned to accept invisibility as mine. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with truths emerging like shells revealed by retreating tidewaters. My family began to understand that their comfortable dynamic had been built on my willingness to diminish myself for their convenience. They started recognizing patterns they had never questioned how they directed party planning requests to me while consulting Jessica about her preferences, how they allocated financial resources generously for her while assuming I required less support, how they scheduled family gatherings around her availability while expecting me to accommodate whatever remained. As the morning progressed, something shifted in the quality of our interaction. Instead of defending their behavior or minimizing my experiences, my family members began asking questions designed to understand rather than deflect. They wanted to know about my feelings, my needs, my dreams beyond serving their logistical requirements. What would it look like for you to feel valued in this family? Betty asked her question, cutting straight to the heart of what needed to change. I took a deep breath, tasting salt air and possibility. It would look like equal consideration for my important events, equal financial support for my goals and celebrations, equal emotional investment in my happiness and success. It would look like being consulted about family decisions that affect me rather than being told about arrangements other people have made. It would look like being seen as Jessica's sister and your daughter, not as the family's unpaid event coordinator. The sun had moved across the sky during our conversation, casting different shadows on the porch, as my family grappled with the reality of rebuilding relationships they had damaged through neglect. By noon, we had established the foundation for a new dynamic based on mutual respect, rather than assumed availability. But the most surprising revelation came from Jessica herself, who had remained quiet for long stretches while absorbing the full impact of how our family's favoritism had shaped both our lives. I've been jealous of you for years, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Everyone always talks about how capable and responsible and talented you are. I felt like I had to be constantly entertaining and demanding because that was the only way to get attention. I thought if I stopped being the center of everything, nobody would notice me at all. Her words revealed a truth I had never considered, that our family's dysfunction had damaged both of us, creating a dynamic where she felt pressure to perform constant neediness while I felt obligated to provide constant service. We've both been trapped by roles that served everyone except us, I realized aloud. You've been the princess who couldn't function independently, and I've been the servant who couldn't expect consideration. As afternoon approached, my family began discussing concrete changes they committed to implementing: equal birthday budgets and attention, shared responsibility for family event planning, regular family meetings where my voice carried equal weight, financial support for my goals and dreams that matched what they had provided for Jessica. Most importantly, they committed to seeing me as a complete person rather than a collection of useful services. We want to plan a proper 28th birthday celebration for you, Carol offered tentatively. Something that reflects your preferences rather than our assumptions about what you should want. I looked out at the ocean, watching waves continue their eternal rhythm, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope for authentic family relationships based on love rather than labor. I'd like that, I said finally, but I want Jessica to plan it the same way I've planned hers for 10 years. Jessica nodded immediately, her face brightening with the possibility of giving rather than just receiving for once. I promise I'll make it perfect, she said. Actually perfect, not just elaborate. As my family prepared to drive back home, Betty lingered on the porch while the others loaded into their cars. I have something for you, she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. I've been saving money for years, watching how unfairly you've been treated and preparing for the day when you'd need resources to create your own life. Inside the envelope was a bank statement showing an account with $50,000 accumulated over 2 decades of small deposits and careful investment. I opened this when you turned 18, Betty explained. Every Christmas and birthday that your parents forgot, I put money aside for you. Consider it an investment in your independence and your future happiness. I stared at the statement, overwhelmed by the realization that someone had been quietly acknowledging my worth, even when I felt most invisible. Thank you, I whispered, hugging my grandmother with gratitude that extended far beyond money to encompass validation and recognition. That evening, as my family drove home with new understanding of what needed to change, I extended my stay at Seaside Haven for one more night. Helen joined me for dinner on the porch, sharing stories of her own journey toward self-worth and the courage required to demand better treatment from people who had grown comfortable with offering less. The hardest part, she said as we watched stars emerge over the ocean, is maintaining your boundaries after people apologize and promise to change. Growth is messy and inconsistent. You'll need to keep advocating for yourself, even after today's breakthrough. I nodded, understanding that this weekend represented a beginning rather than a conclusion. Real change would require sustained effort from all of us, but for the first time in my life, I believed my family was capable of seeing me clearly enough to love me appropriately. The waves continued their eternal rhythm as I fell asleep that night, finally at peace with both my past and my future. 1 month later, I stood in my apartment bathroom applying lipstick and earrings for my belated 28th birthday celebration, marveling at how different this preparation felt from the countless times I had dressed for Jessica's events. Tonight, I was the guest of honor rather than the behind-the-scenes coordinator, and the anticipation felt foreign and wonderful in equal measure. Jessica had spent 3 weeks planning what she called Mia's Perfect Day, conducting research with the thoroughness of a detective, investigating my actual preferences rather than projecting her own desires onto my celebration. She had interviewed my college friends, consulted my coworkers, and even called my favorite restaurants to understand the flavors and atmospheres that genuinely appealed to me. The location she chose surprised everyone, including me. Instead of the grand ballroom settings our family typically favored, Jessica had reserved the private dining room at Sage and Thyme, a cozy farm-to-table restaurant where I had mentioned enjoying lunch with colleagues several months earlier. The space featured exposed brick walls, soft lighting from Edison bulbs, and windows overlooking a herb garden that the chefs harvested for their seasonal menus. I wanted somewhere that felt like you, Jessica explained when she called to confirm details. Elegant, but not pretentious. Beautiful, but not overwhelming. Somewhere people could actually talk to each other instead of just being impressed by decorations. 25 guests had been invited, a deliberately intimate number that included my closest friends, supportive coworkers, and family members who had demonstrated genuine commitment to changing our dysfunctional patterns. The guest list itself represented a revolution. For the first time in family history, a celebration was being designed around my comfort and preferences rather than someone else's vision of what should impress observers. Emma, my coworker who had received the promotion I had wanted, greeted me at the restaurant entrance with a warm hug and an apology that had been weeks in the making. I should have acknowledged how qualified you were for that position, she said, her sincerity evident in her direct eye contact and careful word choice. I was so excited about my own opportunity that I didn't consider how my success might feel to someone who deserved equal consideration. Thank you, I replied, surprised by how much her acknowledgement meant to me. I'm learning to advocate for myself more effectively, and part of that includes accepting gracious apologies when people offer them. The restaurant's private dining room had been transformed with understated elegance that reflected careful attention to my actual tastes rather than generic luxury. Simple white candles flickered in mason jars filled with wildflowers from local meadows. The tables were set with mismatched vintage plates that created visual interest without ostentation. Soft jazz played in the background, reminiscent of the music I actually enjoyed, rather than what others thought should soundtrack important occasions. Carol approached me carrying a small wrapped package, her movements tentative in the way of someone still learning how to navigate reformed relationship dynamics. I wanted to give you this privately before the group celebration, she said, her voice carrying genuine nervousness. I spent a lot of time thinking about what you might actually want instead of what I think you should have. Inside the elegant wrapping was a leather journal with my initials embossed in gold, along with a note written in Carol's careful handwriting, for recording your own thoughts, dreams, and experiences instead of everyone else's party details. I hope you fill every page with things that matter to you. The gift demonstrated understanding of who I was as an individual rather than assumption about what any daughter might appreciate. It acknowledged my love of writing while creating space for my own voice instead of my family's agenda. David's gift came with an equally thoughtful presentation. He handed me an envelope containing the deed to a small beach cottage 2 hours north of the city, not far from Seaside Haven, where my journey toward self-advocacy had begun. I know you've always loved the ocean. He explained, his usual business confidence replaced by paternal uncertainty. This can be your retreat whenever family obligations become overwhelming, or your investment property if you prefer financial independence. Either way, it's yours without strings or expectations about how you'll use it. The cottage was a simple 2-bedroom structure with weathered shingles and a wraparound porch positioned on a bluff overlooking the same coastline where I had learned to value myself. The deed was made out solely in my name, representing the first substantial asset I owned without family oversight or input. But Jessica's gift carried the most emotional weight because it demonstrated personal growth rather than financial generosity. She approached me carrying a handwritten letter sealed in an envelope addressed to my sister Mia, the person I'm finally learning to see clearly. I wrote this instead of buying something expensive. She explained, her usual confidence replaced by vulnerability that made her seem younger and more genuine. I figured after 10 years of you giving me elaborate presents, maybe what you really needed was evidence that someone in this family actually notices who you are. The letter contained 3 pages of specific observations about my character, talents, dreams, and contributions that Jessica had never previously acknowledged. She wrote about my kindness to elderly neighbors, my skill at mediating workplace conflicts, my talent for making elaborate meals look effortless, and my ability to remember important details about friends' lives. Most importantly, she wrote about her own realization that she had been unconsciously competing with me for parental attention instead of appreciating the sister who had always supported her success. I want us to be friends, she concluded the letter. Not just sisters by accident of birth, but actual friends who choose to care about each other's happiness and support each other's dreams. Betty's presence at the celebration carried special significance because her initial confrontation had catalyzed our family's transformation. She sat beside me during dinner, sharing stories about her own youth and the courage required to claim equal treatment in relationships that had been built on unequal foundations. "Change is possible at any age," she said, patting my hand with fingers that bore evidence of 8 decades of experience. "But it requires sustained commitment from everyone involved. Tonight is beautiful, but the real test will be maintaining these new patterns when life becomes stressful again." Her wisdom proved prophetic because family change, like all meaningful growth, occurred in fits and starts rather than smooth progression. Over the following months, there were moments when old patterns reasserted themselves. Carol occasionally slipped into treating me as the family's automatic problem solver. David sometimes forgot to include me in financial discussions that affected my future. Jessica had to consciously resist the impulse to assume her needs should take precedence over mine. But the difference was that these lapses became opportunities for conversation rather than reasons for resignation. Our family had developed vocabulary for discussing fairness, consideration, and mutual respect. We had established regular check-ins where everyone could voice concerns before resentment accumulated into crisis. 6 months after my beach weekend revelation, I applied for and received the promotion that had previously gone to Emma. My newfound confidence in advocating for myself translated into professional advancement that reflected my actual qualifications rather than my willingness to accept whatever others thought I deserved. The promotion came with a 30% salary increase that allowed me to reduce my financial dependence on family approval. For the first time in my adult life, I could make choices based on my own preferences rather than economic necessity or family expectations. Jessica and I began planning each other's celebrations in alternating years, creating a tradition based on reciprocity rather than assumed service. She discovered genuine satisfaction in researching my preferences and crafting experiences designed to reflect my personality. I found renewed joy in celebration planning when it was acknowledged as a gift I chose to give rather than a service I was expected to provide. Our relationship evolved from dutiful sisters to genuine friends who sought each other's company by choice rather than obligation. We started meeting for monthly lunches where we discussed our respective goals, challenges, and dreams without the shadow of family competition that had previously distorted our interactions. The most significant change was in how our family approached conflict resolution and decision-making. Instead of assuming my availability and compliance, my parents began consulting me about arrangements that affected my time and energy. Instead of defaulting to elaborate gestures for Jessica while overlooking my milestones, they established equal consideration as the baseline for family celebrations. These changes required conscious effort and frequent recalibration, but they created space for authentic relationships based on love rather than labor. On my 29th birthday, I received cards, gifts, and genuine attention from every family member. The celebration was held at my beach cottage, the one David had given me as both apology and investment in my independence. Helen from Seaside Haven joined us for dinner, having become a chosen family member whose wisdom continued guiding my growth. As we sat on my cottage porch watching sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment of authentic connection. A year ago, I was invisible in my own family. I shared with the group gathered around my table. I thought my value came from serving everyone else's happiness while ignoring my own needs. I believed that love meant making myself smaller so other people could shine brighter. Jessica reached across the table to squeeze my hand, her gesture carrying years of reformed understanding. "But real love requires recognition," I continued. "It requires seeing each other clearly and choosing to nurture each person's individual worth. It requires reciprocity rather than martyrdom, consideration rather than assumption, and boundaries rather than boundless availability. Carol raised her wine glass in a toast that acknowledged both our past mistakes and our current commitment to growth. To Mia, she said, her voice carrying emotion that seemed both heavy with regret and light with hope, for teaching us that disappearing sometimes is the only way to help people learn to see you clearly. The waves below continued their eternal rhythm as we shared stories, laughter, and dreams for a future built on mutual respect rather than unexamined habits. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and valued by the people whose opinions had always mattered most to me. That night, as my family and chosen family members settled into guest rooms throughout the cottage, I stood on my balcony breathing salt air and marveling at how much had changed in 12 months. The woman who had disappeared to a beach to avoid her sister's birthday party had evolved into someone who could claim equal consideration without guilt or apology. The most important lesson I learned was that self-worth cannot be granted by other people. It must be claimed by ourselves and maintained through consistent advocacy for our own needs and dreams. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for others is refuse to accept less than we deserve, forcing them to rise to the level of consideration we require. My family's transformation had been possible because they were capable of growth when confronted with consequences for their neglect. But even if they had remained unchanged, my own evolution toward self-advocacy would have been valuable and necessary. As I prepared for sleep in my own cottage overlooking the endless ocean, I felt profound gratitude for the courage I had found to value myself enough to walk away from people who had forgotten to value me. That weekend at Seaside Haven had taught me that true family love requires recognition, respect, and reciprocity. It had shown me that sometimes disappearing teaches others to see you clearly, and that claiming your worth creates space for authentic relationships based on mutual consideration rather than one-sided service. The waves outside my window whispered promises of continued growth and possibility as I drifted off to sleep, finally at peace with both my past and my future, finally confident in my worth as someone deserving of love that recognizes rather than overlooks, celebrates rather than takes for granted, and chooses to see clearly rather than conveniently ignore. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family or found yourself always giving while rarely receiving equal consideration? What steps have you taken to advocate for yourself in relationships where your worth wasn't being recognized? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your story might inspire someone else to claim the respect they deserve. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find these family dynamics discussions. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about finding your voice and transforming difficult relationships. And share this with someone who might need to hear that their worth doesn't depend on other people's ability to see it clearly. Thank you for listening to Mia's journey toward self-advocacy and family transformation. Remember that real love requires recognition, and you deserve relationships that celebrate your existence rather than taking it for granted. Until next time, keep believing in your worth and advocating for the consideration you deserve.